By late November of 1942, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It was a graveyard of pulverized concrete, twisted tram lines, shattered apartment blocks, and snow turned red by months of street fighting. Buildings that once housed families stood hollowed out, their stairwells leading nowhere, their rooms burned black. The Volga, once a wide artery for commerce, now froze and unfroze in jagged sheets, cracking like gunfire under artillery blasts. The air itself seemed permanently stained with smoke. The Germans called it the Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Soviet soldiers simply called it hell. Every street, every courtyard, every collapsed basement had become a front line. There were no clean advances or neat divisions, just men clawing for inches, sometimes fighting for the same building for weeks at a time. A floor taken by night could be lost by dawn. A basement cleared in the morning might be filled with enemy troops by lunchtime. And in this nightmare of rubble and ruin moved a young man from the Ural Mountains, quiet, calm, sharp-eyed, a hunter long before he became a soldier. His name was Vasily Grigorievich Zaytsev, and he had already become a ghost story whispered among German infantrymen. But before the duel with the famous German sniper König, before the legend, before the propaganda, there was another story rarely told, yet documented clearly in Soviet sniper logs and Zaytsev's own memoirs. A story of patience, mud, cold, endurance, and a single impossible shot. In late November, the German 71st Infantry Division had captured a cluster of partially standing buildings near the Krasny Oktyabr, Red October factory complex. From there, they installed a Maschinengewehr 34, set deep inside the broken shell of a collapsed apartment block. It was positioned perfectly, protected by piles of debris, shielded by jagged walls that survived the bombing, and invisible from most angles. But its fields of fire, they were devastating. In 48 hours, the MG-34 had pinned down entire Soviet platoons, cut off stretcher teams, and turned every attempt at reinforcement into a slaughter. Soviet scouts reported that the machine gun operated with terrifying efficiency. It fired short, disciplined bursts, 3 to 7 rounds at a time, not random sprays. The pattern was the mark of a trained gunner, and this gunner was smart. He shifted position every few minutes, using rubble and shadow to mask his firing slits. His assistant gunner reloaded with machine-like precision. More importantly, they waited, patiently, until Soviet movement peaked before firing. "He sees everything," one wounded soldier muttered before being dragged back across the Volga. By the third day, the Soviet regimental commander had enough. He sent word to the 284th Rifle Division's sniper headquarters, and the headquarters sent Zaytsev. Zaytsev arrived shortly after dawn, carrying his Mosin Nagant 9130 sniper rifle, fitted with a 4-power PU scope. The barrel was wrapped in cloth to stop sun reflection and keep frost from forming. His uniform was smeared with soot and dust, his face camouflaged with ash. He surveyed the battlefield with calm, professional eyes. This wasn't a duel between snipers. This was a hunt, and the prey was a machine gun team, killing Zaytsev's comrades by the dozen. A young lieutenant from the rifle regiment crouched beside him. "That thing is a devil's nest," he said. "We've lost 30 men trying to move past it. It's too well hidden. Artillery can't hit it. Mortars can't reach it. And every time someone pops their head out..." He trailed off. Zaytsev nodded once. "Show me," he said simply. The lieutenant led him to a shell crater overlooking the ruins. They stayed low. The Germans had the area sighted perfectly. Zaytsev scanned the snow-covered rubble field, noting angles, broken beams, collapsed floors, and the ways light played against the ruins. He didn't see any gunner, but he saw a possibility. He pointed. "There," he whispered. The lieutenant squinted. "I don't see anything." "He's in that broken stairwell. He's using the collapsed concrete slab to mask the muzzle flash." This was what separated Zaytsev from most snipers. He didn't look for the enemy. He looked for what the enemy needed: cover, elevation, fire lanes, shadow. Zaytsev slowly traced the machine gun's fire pattern across the battlefield, marking the arcs where men had fallen. It formed a cone, wide at the Soviet line, narrowing to a tight point near the collapsed building. That point was his target, but the approach was suicide. There was no safe building to move through, no trench to follow, no shell crater deep enough to hide even a crouching man. The ground between him and the machine gun nest was open rubble, broken plaster, and churned mud, every inch of it under German observation. Zaytsev studied the terrain for a long time. Then he exhaled slowly. "I'll crawl," he said. The lieutenant stared at him. "Crawl? Through that? It'll take you hours." Zaytsev didn't look away from the ridge. "It will take me as long as it must." Zaytsev left everything behind, except his rifle, his knife, and a canteen. He removed his overcoat to lighten himself. He tied his rifle to his ankle with a strip of cloth, so it would drag silently behind him without snagging. Then, just as the first snow flurries began drifting down from the grey Stalingrad sky, he slipped over the edge of the Soviet position and began the long crawl across no man's land. He moved slowly, so slowly it barely counted as movement. One elbow forward, pause. One knee forward, pause. The pauses were not seconds, they were minutes. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20. The Germans were watching the field. Zaytsev knew it. A single careless movement could reveal him. The MG-34 crew would tear him to pieces in less than a heartbeat. He pressed himself as low as possible, letting the grit and snow and broken glass grind into his uniform. At points, he slid forward like a snake, chest and stomach scraping across frozen mud. He crawled between broken boards. He crawled under the exposed ribs of burned vehicles. He crawled silently across ground, soaked with the frozen blood of fallen soldiers. Every inch closed the distance. Every inch increased the risk. After an hour, the cold set into his bones. After 2 hours, he couldn't feel his fingertips. After 3, his elbows bled from scraping against rubble. By hour 5, the snow was falling steadily. The ruins of Stalingrad blurred into a grey, frozen haze. Zaytsev welcomed the snowfall. It masked his movement. It covered his tracks. It softened the sounds. Still, he did not speed up. He could not afford even a single mistake. Near midday, as Zaytsev inched forward beneath the charred beam of a collapsed ceiling, the MG-34 suddenly barked to life. A burst of 6 rounds, short, controlled, lethal. Soviet infantry across the field dove for cover. Snow and dust sprayed into the air as bullets chewed into the ground. The Germans were firing again. He listened to the rhythm. 3 seconds pause, 4 seconds pause, then another short burst. Yes, the gunner was exactly where Zaytsev predicted, but he still could not see him. He crawled forward another meter, then another, then another. The day was dying fast. The cold was growing harsher. His muscles trembled from exhaustion. But he kept going. 10 hours, 11 hours. And toward dusk of the 12th hour, he finally reached the place he needed to be. A small depression in the rubble, just 150 meters from the machine gun nest. Close enough to see. Close enough to kill, but too close for error. The real duel was about to begin. For the first time in nearly 12 hours, Zaytsev stopped crawling. He slid silently into a shallow depression created by a collapsed floor beam, a space barely large enough for his body and rifle. It wasn't comfortable. Sharp edges of broken concrete pressed into his ribs. A shard of glass stuck through the cloth of his sleeve. Snow seeped into the folds of his uniform, chilling his already numb skin. But from here, from this exact, miserable spot, he finally had a fighting chance. The German machine gun nest stood ahead, nestled into the ruins of the shattered apartment block. Zaytsev had been right. The gunner was using the jagged remains of a collapsed stairwell to mask his firing position, squeezing off bursts from a low, recessed angle that was nearly impossible to spot from the Soviet line. Even from 150 meters, Zaytsev could barely see it. Just a dark slit in a wall of broken concrete, a black mouth spitting death. He didn't raise his rifle immediately. He needed to study, to memorize, to understand the rhythm of his enemy. He rested his cheek on the cold rubble and watched. The machine gun fired again, a tight, controlled burst. The gunner wasn't panicking. He wasn't spraying. He was firing with purpose. Calm, measured, disciplined. Short bursts that barely revealed muzzle flash. The way a man fired when he had fought many battles, when he trusted his weapon the way a pianist trusts keys beneath their fingers. Zaytsev knew this mastery intimately. It was the kind of control that only came from years of training and countless engagements. This was no amateur. This was a veteran, possibly from a Jaeger regiment or one of the elite machine gun companies that had bled across the Volga. Zaytsev watched for 30 minutes. The pattern became clear. The gunner shifted slightly after each burst, just a few centimeters left or right. Just enough so that Soviet mortarmen could not pinpoint the exact location. He fired only when he had a clear target, never wasting ammunition. This was a professional, a dangerous one. Zaytsev adjusted his position, careful not to disturb the rubble. Even a single misplaced stone could cascade down the incline and reveal his hide. He pressed his body deeper into the depression. He slowed his breathing. He became as still as the broken masonry around him. The snow thickened. The wind whispered through the ruins. The machine gun barked again, but the light was fading. Day was dying. The fading light. In winter, Stalingrad's daylight was a cruel trick, lasting only a few hours before the sun sank behind smoke and ruins. Zaytsev knew the shot had to happen before nightfall. His scope wasn't built for darkness. His eyes could adjust, but the MG-34 gunner was well hidden, and dusk would make him nearly invisible. He gently lifted the rifle into position. The Mosin Nagant 9130 felt alive, its worn stock fitting perfectly against his shoulder, as familiar to him as the hunting rifles he'd used since childhood. The PU scope's 4x magnification wasn't much, but it was enough if he could see the slightest movement. He studied the nest, nothing but darkness. He shifted slightly to the left, then to the right, searching for a glimmer. Metal reflecting sunlight, eyes blinking, a shadow moving. Nothing. He lowered the rifle and waited. A sniper knows the truth. The battlefield rewards those who wait the longest. Minutes stretched into an hour. Zaytsev did not move. He barely blinked. His fingers, numb from cold and exhaustion, curled around the rifle stock. He kept the safety off. He could not afford even the slight sound of disengaging it later. A distant explosion from artillery shook dust from the beam above him. He ignored it. A Soviet soldier shouted somewhere behind the lines. He ignored it. He focused only on the dark slit. The MG-34 fired again, then again. But still, the gunner never exposed himself enough. Zaytsev began looking for something else. Not the man, but what the man needed. Ammunition. The gunner had been firing for hours. He would have to reload soon, and reloading meant passing an ammo, belt, leaning slightly, and shifting posture. Shifting. Just enough. Zaytsev waited. The cold crept deeper into his bones. His elbows throbbed from the crawl. His face burned from wind and frost. He whispered to himself, "Just a little longer." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ruins, something in the stairwell's slit changed. It was tiny, hardly noticeable, but Zaytsev saw it. A shape, a faint momentary interruption in the pattern of darkness inside the nest. Not a hand, not a face, just motion, so slight that anyone else would have dismissed it as shifting shadow. But shadows don't move like that. A man does. Zaytsev slowly raised his rifle. He aligned the crosshairs with the dark slit. Nothing visible, nothing clear. The shot would have to be predictive, instinctual, timing, not visuals. The gunner fired again. Then, for the first time all day, the burst was longer. Maybe the gunner was getting tired. Maybe he was losing discipline. Maybe he sensed Soviet movement. The longer burst meant something. It meant he was about to reload. Zaytsev brought his cheek tighter against the stock. He steadied his breathing. He pressed his elbow deeper into the mud. He settled into the shot. A breeze slipped through the ruins. Snowflakes danced sideways, drifting across Zaytsev's field of view. The wind would push the bullet slightly left at this distance. He adjusted, just a hair, then waited. The machine gun went silent. Now, the gunner leaned, just barely, a shadow within shadow. But Zaytsev saw it. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the ruins, a sharp, whip-like sound, swallowed instantly by the city's broken acoustics. For half a second, there was nothing. Then movement. A body slumped forward in the black slit. The gun barrel dropped. The firing stopped. The machine gun nest was silent. Zaytsev kept his scope trained. Snipers always confirm. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Not a flicker. He exhaled slowly. The shot had landed. Behind the nest, deeper inside the ruin, he saw another movement. Something softer, smoother, almost serpentine. The assistant gunner. He wasn't returning fire. He was dragging his comrade deeper into the rubble, perhaps out of reflex or shock. Zaytsev lined up again. He waited, watched, listened. The assistant gunner froze, realizing perhaps that death was staring at him through a scope. He ducked back into the darkness. Zaytsev did not fire. If he shot into darkness, he'd risk revealing his muzzle flash and losing his concealment. He whispered, "You can drag him, but you cannot fire that gun again." The machine gun nest was dead, but its ghosts were still moving, and the Germans knew the shot had come from somewhere they hadn't expected. Zaytsev sensed it instinctively. A counter-sniper would soon be coming for him. His hardest challenge had just begun. Behind the nest, deeper inside the ruin, he saw another movement. Something softer, smoother, almost serpentine. The assistant gunner. He wasn't returning fire. He was dragging his comrade deeper into the rubble, perhaps out of reflex or shock. Zaytsev lined up again. He waited, watched, listened. The assistant gunner froze, realizing perhaps that death was staring at him through a scope. He ducked back into the darkness. Zaytsev did not fire. If he shot into darkness, he'd risk revealing his muzzle flash and losing his concealment. He whispered, "You can drag him, but you cannot fire that gun again." The machine gun nest was dead, but its ghosts were still moving, and the Germans knew the shot had come from somewhere they hadn't expected. Zaytsev sensed it instinctively. A counter-sniper would soon be coming for him. His hardest challenge had just begun. Zaytsev lowered his rifle only enough to blink and stretch the frost from his eyelashes. He had been lying in the depression for hours, unmoving except for the shot itself. Blood barely circulated in his arms. His fingers felt thick, as if wrapped in layers of felt, The cold gnawed at him like an animal. He pushed his discomfort aside. He slowly shifted his viewpoint, scanning the edges of the ruin, not the machine gun nest, but everything around it. Snipers never occupy the position of the man they replace. They select a new angle, a new shadow, a new vantage. Zaytsev studied cracked windows and split walls. He watched for unnatural shapes, straight lines in nature, dark voids where stone should catch the light, slight changes in texture that could reveal a uniform instead of rubble. Nothing. He moved his scope upward, slowly, patiently, a half-destroyed chimney, a collapsed rooftop, pillars of concrete standing like jagged teeth. Then, there, something shifted, a subtle flicker, a disturbance in dust. It came from a blackened gap between two crumbled floors, an opening too narrow for a rifle, but just wide enough for a pair of watchful eyes. Zaytsev's pupils narrowed. That was no accident. The enemy was watching him. He held still, perfectly still. Sniper duels begin long before the first bullet is fired. They begin with patience, invisible movement, soundless breathing, a contest of wills in which the slightest twitch can end a life. Then, from that shadowed gap, a flash, small, brief, unmistakable, muzzle flash. Zaytsev's cheek stung as a bullet tore across the rubble, shaving stone just inches from his head. Tiny shards peppered his skin, cutting into the dried mud and grime on his face. He did not flinch, not even a blink. He breathed out slowly, letting the pain wash across him without reaction. The German had made the first move, a dangerous one, revealing his general direction. Zaytsev understood two things immediately. One, the sniper was good, very good. Two, he was probing, not committing, testing the wind, the angle, Zaytsev's reaction. Time. Zaytsev remained motionless. A lesser sniper would dive for cover. A trained sniper would roll away. A master sniper would not move at all, letting the enemy think the shot missed due to distance, not accuracy. Minutes passed. The duel entered its second phase. Zaytsev placed his rifle back on the rubble, inch by inch, until the scope was aligned roughly with the shadowed gap. He did not aim directly yet. That would kill him. A good German sniper would watch for the telltale glint of glass, a reflection from the PU scope, and fire at it. Instead, Zaytsev observed indirectly. He angled the rifle just slightly left of the gap, letting the edge of the scope's view catch the area he wanted, without risking a straight line. Nothing. No silhouette, no barrel, no movement. He waited. The trick to beating another sniper wasn't speed. It was understanding what he needed to see. The angle of your muzzle, the shape of your helmet, the outline of your cheek as you leaned to shoot. If he saw anything that resembled a human silhouette, he would fire again. So Zaytsev denied him everything. He stayed absolutely flat, letting the cloak of rubble mask his form. He shifted only his eyes. The German, somewhere in the wreckage, also waited. Minutes felt like hours. Then a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, almost nothing. But Zaytsev saw it. A faint reflection off glass, not a lens, too dim. It was the reflection of the tiny metal ring encircling the German's scope. He had him, but he didn't shoot, not yet. Zaytsev needed a guaranteed kill. The German sniper had chosen a powerful vantage, sun behind him, wind on his side, and rubble darkening his silhouette. With the light fading, a rushed shot would likely ricochet or strike stone. He needed visibility, he needed movement, but he also needed safety. He reached slowly into the mud with his left hand, closing fingers around a small chunk of shattered brick. It was roughly the size of a fist. He waited for a gust of wind to help mask the motion, then flicked it gently to his right. The brick clattered softly, rolling against broken stone, and the German sniper fired. A muzzle flash ignited the gap like a spark. A bullet screamed into the rubble where the brick fell. The German had fired too quickly, reacting to sound, not sight. Zaytsev smiled slightly, barely noticeable. He now knew the exact gap, the exact angle, the exact timing of his enemy's fire. The German sniper had made his first real mistake. Zaytsev prepared to make his last. He brought the rifle into final position, this time directly on the gap. He inhaled and held. The wind eased. The snowfall paused. Even the distant artillery seemed to hush for one brief moment. Zaytsev whispered, "Come on, look for me." The German sniper, convinced that his target was still shifting to the right, leaned slightly forward in the darkness. Searching, scanning, hunting. That movement, that slight, fatal lean, was all Zaytsev needed. He squeezed the trigger. The Mosin Nagant cracked like a whip. Zaytsev did not blink. He did not lower his rifle. He did not move. He watched, and in the darkness of the gap, a shape jerked backward. A rifle clattered against stone. A body slumped forward into the snow, sliding partially into the open. The German sniper was dead. The duel, long, silent, deadly, was over. For several minutes, Zaytsev remained motionless, watching to ensure there would be no second sniper, no final desperate shot from the dying man. There wasn't. Slowly, he exhaled. He rolled his aching shoulders. He stretched stiff fingers that had frozen around the rifle. He let the cold, raw relief wash through him. From the Soviet line behind him came distant shouts. "The gun is down! Advance! Go! Go!" Infantry surged forward, moving across ground that had been a killing field for days. Medics raced to retrieve wounded comrades who had been pinned down since morning. And all the while, Zaytsev lay in the mud, exhausted, freezing, bleeding from dozens of tiny cuts, but alive. The duel had drained him, but it had also proven something critical. The Germans weren't the only ones with elite snipers. Stalingrad belonged to hunters like him, and the night was not yet over. Killing a man in war is rarely the end of the danger. More often, it's the moment when everything becomes worse. Zaytsev knew this as he watched the German sniper's body slump halfway out of the jagged gap. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. The machine gun nest remained silent, the shattered building motionless in the fading winter light. Then, like a city exhaling, Stalingrad shook itself awake. German voices shouted from deep within the ruin. Orders barked. Boots scraped on broken concrete. Somewhere behind the structure, a whistle blew. They'd realized what had happened. Their death machine, the MG-34 that had dominated the sector, was silent. Their own sniper, sent to hunt the Soviet marksman, was now hanging dead in the gap for all to see. And the Germans were furious. It began with a single mortar round. It landed 50 meters to Zaytsev's left, throwing snow, stone, and frozen earth into the air. The blast wave punched through his shallow depression, rattling his bones and peppering his face with debris. He ducked instinctively, pressing himself deeper into the ground. The second shell fell closer, then a third, then a fourth. They weren't aiming at him precisely. They didn't know exactly where he was, but they knew the direction. They knew the area from which the fatal shot must have been fired, and they intended to saturate it. The mortar barrage grew into a pattern, walking shells across the ruins in a slow, methodical sweep. The Germans weren't just lashing out in anger. They were performing a calculated response. Kill the sniper, or at least make his extraction. Suicidal. Zaytsev knew that staying in place would kill him. He also knew that moving too quickly would do the same. So, he did what only a sniper would think to do. He became even smaller. He untied the cloth securing the rifle to his leg and pulled the Mosin Nagant close, nestling it along his body. Then he rolled, inch by inch, until the debris above him formed a natural roof. Broken rebar stuck down like twisted roots. A half-shattered brick leaned against a beam, creating a kind of crude, low arch. He slid beneath it, chest scraping stone, breath slow and controlled. He stopped when he could barely lift his head. Here, he would be harder to spot, even if the Germans sent infantry to sweep the area. Mortar fire continued to pound the field. Another shell hit so close that the pressure wave punched the air from his lungs. Dust filled his mouth. For a few terrifying seconds, he couldn't breathe. He forced himself not to cough, not to choke, not to move. Slowly, he inhaled again, then exhaled through clenched teeth. This was not the first time he'd been shelled, but rarely had he been this exposed, this deep in front of his own lines, with no one to cover him. He had crawled 12 hours to get here, maybe more. Now he had to crawl all of that again to return. Over the roar of explosions, Zaytsev heard a different sound, one that turned his cold exhaustion into something like grim satisfaction. The sound of Soviet voices, shouts of "Ura!" clawing their way up through the smoke. His shot had done its work. With the machine gun nest silenced and the German sniper dead, Soviet infantry were moving forward. Their boots crunched over debris. Submachine guns fired in short bursts. Grenades thumped into ruined rooms and detonated with dull, concussive whomps. The assault was on. He could just make out figures darting between wreckage, dark shapes against the snow. They dove into craters, pressed against walls, climbed through windows that no longer had glass. Flames flickered as Molotov cocktails and explosives went into lower-level openings. The building that had once housed the German machine gun was now a target. Artillery, however, was indifferent to sides. Shell fragments and falling stone didn't care whether a man spoke Russian or German. And Zaytsev was still stuck between both lines. He needed to move before one side or the other buried him alive. Snipers sometimes stay in position after a shot until the battle has clearly shifted. Other times they withdraw immediately, using the confusion of combat to slip away unnoticed. Here, Zaytsev chose a middle path. He waited until he heard the first Soviet soldiers yelling from inside the building itself. Short, brutal cries, punctuated by gunshots and the muffled screams of surprised German defenders. Only then did he begin his crawl back. He did not rise, he did not crouch, he did not do anything that would create a silhouette. He slid backward the same way he had advanced, dragging himself through the frozen mud and rubble with the same painstaking slowness. Every inch was deliberate. Mortar shelling had shifted, now impacting deeper within the Soviet-held area and behind German fallback lines. The immediate front grew quieter. Rifle shots cracked inside the ruins where close-quarters fighting raged. Zaytsev used that noise as his cover. Each time an explosion sounded, he moved. Each time it went quiet, he froze. He avoided his own previous crawl path as much as he could. The Germans might have registered depressions in the snow or broken debris. Instead, he cut a shallow diagonal, using newly formed craters as temporary cover. The journey back was not a straight line. It was a jagged, agonizing S-curve through hell. Halfway back, he encountered something that made him stop. Ahead of him, maybe 20 meters away, lay a Soviet soldier. Young, barely more than a boy. His coat was torn, and crimson stained the snow beneath him. His leg was twisted unnaturally. His rifle lay at an angle, half buried. He was alive. Zaytsev could see the man's breath steaming faintly in the cold. His eyes moved occasionally, unfocused, blinking against the falling snow. He had been lying there since before Zaytsev's crawl began, pinned down by the machine gun. unable to move, bleeding out a few dozen meters from safety. Zaytsev's instincts, honed on the harsh slopes of the Urals, told him one thing. If he tried to help, he would likely die. If he didn't, the soldier almost certainly would. He scanned the German positions. Few muzzles pointed their way now. Most defenders were either dead, retreating, or engaged in close combat with advancing Soviet troops. The risk had changed. Zaytsev made his decision. He crawled toward the wounded man. The soldier's eyes widened as Zaytsev approached. You're the sniper," the young man whispered, voice cracking. Zaytsev nodded once. "Be quiet. Save your strength." The soldier tried to speak again, but his voice broke into a cough. Blood flecked his lips. Zaytsev checked the leg. It was bad. Shattered bone, deep shrapnel wounds. Moving him would be excruciating, but there was no time for splints. "Listen to me," Zaytsev said softly. "You're going home. You understand? You don't die here." The young man nodded, tears mixing with snow. Zaytsev slung his rifle across his back, muzzle down to avoid snow choking the barrel. Then he crawled behind the wounded soldier, hooked his arms under the man's armpits, and began dragging him backward across the rubble field. It was slow, so much slower than moving alone. Every rock caught on cloth. Every sharp edge tore skin. The wounded man gritted his teeth, muffling groans that threatened to betray them. "Breathe," Zaytsev whispered. "Just breathe. Don't shout. Don't move on your own." They moved a meter, then 2, then 5. Bullets snapped overhead as a final. German squad attempted to fall back under fire. A stray round punched into the rubble nearby, showering them both with dust. Zaytsev lowered his head, shielding the wounded man's face with his own body. They kept moving, slowly, endlessly. The sniper who had spent 12 hours crawling forward to take one shot now spent an eternity dragging another man to safety. After what felt like another lifetime, shapes emerged through the smoke ahead. Soviet helmets, rifles, faces streaked with dirt and exhaust. A voice shouted, "Sniper! It's Zaytsev! He's got one of ours! Get them in!" Hands reached out. They lifted the wounded man from Zaytsev's grip, hauling him toward a makeshift aid station behind a shattered wall. A medic shouted orders. Bandages appeared, morphine, tourniquets. The young soldier looked back once, eyes heavy but awake. Zaytsev nodded. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Only then did he allow himself to feel the weight in his own limbs, the grinding ache in his elbows and knees, the burning in his eyes. He rolled onto his back and stared up at the grey Stalingrad sky. Snowflakes drifted down, melting on his face. A few minutes later, the regimental commander approached. "You neutralized their gun," the officer said, "and their sniper. The battalion has taken the building. You may have saved 100 men." Zaytsev shrugged slightly, still breathing hard. "That was my job," he replied. The commander looked at the wreckage. "No," he said, "crawling 12 hours through mud and snow for one shot. That's more than a job." Zaytsev sat up slowly, gripping his rifle. "It was one shot they couldn't afford to stop," he said, "and one life we couldn't afford to lose." He glanced toward the aid station, where the wounded soldier now lay under a blanket, alive. The commander followed his gaze and nodded. "There will be more like this," he said. "More nests, more snipers, more days like today." Zaytsev rose to his feet, joints protesting, muscles trembling. "I know," he said simply. "I'll be ready." That night, as a freezing wind howled through the broken city, Vasily Zaytsev returned to his sniper post overlooking the ruins. He cleaned his rifle by lamplight, hands moving with careful precision, despite the lingering numbness. Outside, Stalingrad burned and froze at the same time. Inside, a sniper who had crawled through mud for 12 hours to take one shot, prepared for the next day. Because in that city, on that front, there was always another nest, another duel, another shot that might change everything. And Zaytsev would be there, waiting in the rubble.